I'll be telling you about a program we did at Vanderbilt where we used peer education and feedback to change energy-using behaviors among employees. So I should preface this by saying, let's see, how does this work? Okay. That this was a collaboration with Vanderbilt Sustainability and Environmental Management Office, SustainVU is what I'll be calling them. And their primary interest in this was to develop a program that would effectively change employee energy use. They were trying to address the energy use in buildings across campus, and they had had some pretty good success in doing changes in behavior in short-term periods during mandatory curtailment periods when there were energy spikes for various reasons. And they'd also been rolling out a program to address building performance, but they had at this point not done much at all to address ongoing energy consumption among their employees. So this was their first sort of opportunity or effort to address the ongoing conservation problem on campus. And like a lot of organizations, they had a few criteria for what the campaign would look like. They needed to be simple, they needed to be low cost, they were strapped for resources and time, and they needed something that would be easy to sustain over time once the research team was no longer involved with this. So this is, I think, similar to a lot of organizations that people in the audience may be working with. My affiliation was with the Climate Change Research Network, and so we're looking at this from an academic standpoint. Our interest was to look at the comparative effectiveness of these two intervention techniques, feedback and peer education. They've been examined. There's a good track record for success. At the point when this study was done, which was in 2008, there had been relatively little done in the workplace setting, and there was some question as to how we can adapt these types of programs and extend them into a workplace context. Kathy made some excellent points about some of the benefits of doing this work in a workplace. You've got a sort of a captive audience. You've got a lot of interpersonal contact. But it's also a setting where people don't have a direct financial interest to conserve. And it's a setting where people sometimes have less control over the energy that they use, and they have almost no information about how they're using energy. They get no feedback, not even a monthly bill like we do at home. And so these are some of the constraints around trying to change behavior in this context that we were aware of. So again, quickly, the study context was at Vanderbilt. These were all buildings that housed departments and offices. So these were not dormitories or student centers or health facilities. These buildings were primarily used for classrooms, but mostly for departmental staff, faculty, and graduate student researchers. So most of the energy used in these buildings is used with office equipment. Big labs were excluded, so most of it's just pretty standard office setups. And there was about 2,300 faculty, staff, and graduate students who were housed in these 24 buildings. Okay, so an overview of the program. The images are looking a little bit darker, but the concept that we developed was the Think One campaign, and this was primarily driven by the SustainVU staff. And so what they were really trying to convey with this program was the idea that through a series of individual actions and a community performing individual actions, these will add up to substantial changes on campus, substantial savings. And so the overall concept was used to deliver messages profiling individual acts that can be taken and profiling individuals on campus who are really trying to step up and do this. And as I said, it had three intervention components that I'll tell you a little bit more about. One was an informational component, a peer education component, and feedback component. So I'll first tell you about the content of those components, and then I'll explain to you how we set up the evaluation to look at the comparative effectiveness of these components. So the information campaign, we used a website, which is sort of a clearinghouse of information, and a series of postcards that were delivered directly to the employee's mailbox. SustainVU had used emails in the past and found that they felt, and their perception was that these emails were just being discarded pretty quickly. They were being blocked, they were being deleted, people weren't really attending to them. So they really wanted to up the presence of this campaign, and for that reason we opted for the series of informational postcards that we made an effort to make them as sustainable as possible, but always there's a trade-off in the medium and versus the attention you get with that medium. So the postcards were designed to set up our goal of reducing energy use by 15% or more. That was a goal that seemed realistic based on the savings we'd seen during those short-term curtailment periods, but still challenging. And the postcards profiled different themes of action. So this one is showing you actions regarding computer use. We also focused on heating, on cooling, on appliance use. And they were delivered monthly over a period of 4 months when the intervention was being evaluated. Our peer education campaign looks a lot like what you've probably heard about with eco teams or the block leader programs for recycling. So we recruited a building leader in each of the buildings we worked in that were involved in this particular component. And we did that through sort of just social networking on campus. We knew a lot of people already who would kind of come to the Sustain VU group and said, we want to do more, we want to do something in our building. So we reached out to those individuals. People had signed up on listservs. We reached out to those individuals. In a few cases, we went directly to the department staff and asked them if there's someone we could talk to or sort of work with. I felt pretty confident that in most cases, people really were stepping up for this. There was only a couple cases where it felt like someone may have kind of been assigned to this role, which is not really where you want to be for a peer educator program. So by and large, we felt like most people were motivated to really be this building leader. And so this person's job was to send monthly emails to their colleagues that were reinforcing the informational component of the campaign. We gave them a template of the email, and we prompted them each month to do it, but we told them they could modify the email template as much or as little as they want. They can completely rewrite it, or they could leave it as it is. We only asked that they send it from their email address and that they CC our group on it so we knew what was going out. And we also asked that they would be a point of contact in their building. So if people had questions, their colleagues had questions about how do I get this thing fixed, or my thermostat seems finicky, those kinds of questions could go directly to the building leader, and then they would be relayed to our project staff, and we would either work with that building leader or directly to the individual to deal with that. So they were sort of a conduit, a liaison between our staff and their building. And they were trained. I can tell you more if you're interested about how we sort of trained and set these individuals up with the program materials. And then finally, the feedback program consisted of graphs. This is an example here, and there was some accompanied text I've just pulled out just to simplify it, displaying the building's energy use over the period of time. Well, this is a year, I guess. The blue line plots the building's energy use, and the green line shows you the goal of 15% or more for that particular building. Now, this information was delivered, one graph is delivered to all individuals in the building, so we only had access to monthly data at the building level. And so if those of you who are familiar with the feedback literature will know that there's a real sort of recommendation to go as high resolution as possible, that you want to get frequent feedback, real time if possible, and it needs to be very specific to the individual or household. We just didn't have access to that kind of data, so one of our critical, and most organizations don't, so one of our critical questions was, can we use a low resolution type of feedback and still see effective changes in behavior? So here's our experimental design. So we had one condition. So we randomized the 24 buildings into one of 4 treatment conditions. The first one being information only, which served as a sort of control group. So like Karen had mentioned earlier today, this is kind of the go-to approach for changing behavior, the sort of idea that it's simply an information deficit problem. So we started there, and it's almost impossible to roll out any kind of intervention, whether it's feedback, peer education, without providing some information at all. So all of our groups saw that same basic public information campaign where they got the 4 postcards. The peer education group also got the monthly building leader emails. The feedback group got the information campaign plus the feedback graphs, and then we had a group that got everything. And so the question is, how did energy use change differentially across these 4 treatment groups? So here's a snapshot of our results. Let's see how I'm doing on time. Okay, I'll go quickly. Okay, so on the y-axis there, you have kilowatt hours per square foot. The left bar, the dark blue bar, shows you baseline energy use. This was the 4 months prior to the start of the intervention. And the lighter blue bar shows you energy use during the intervention period. Now, I've controlled for this, in this model, I've controlled for historical energy use during the previous 2 years. I've controlled for weather and degree days, so it's essentially kind of controlling for the systematic variation in weather and the way campus is used over time. And what we found was that there was a 4% statistical increase in energy use in the information-only group. The control group saw an increase in energy use, probably due to just more things coming online in a building, but we can't say for sure. The peer education group saw no change in energy use. Statistically, it was the same, dropped about 2%, but there was no significant difference. And then we did see significant drops in the feedback and combined groups. We saw a 7% drop in the feedback group and an 8% drop in the combined group. And so this is really, I think, telling us that it was really feedback that was driving this effect. There was no incremental benefit of adding peer education to the feedback program. That combined group is not different from the feedback group. We saw some issues with our implementation of the building leader program. So this graph shows you the number of emails sent, the proportion of building leaders who sent each number of emails they could have. We saw that about two out of our 12 building leaders didn't implement it at all. So we basically had 2 buildings in a treatment condition that didn't get a treatment. A couple only sent 1 email, a couple sent 2 emails. Most people, a little over 50%, sent 3 emails, and only a couple fully implemented the campaign. So this is the problem with an eco-team kind of approach, is that program officers don't have control over how well it's implemented. And this was a big concern for Sustain VU. So we looked at an analysis again when we removed those 2 buildings who didn't get anything. So this is including those groups that only got 1 or 2 emails, but it's taking out the ones who got nothing. And we did, in fact, see a change in energy use in that peer education group where those 2 buildings were located. So this is a small sample at this point, keep that in mind, but we saw a 4% drop, statistically significant drop in energy use in the peer education campaign. So it looks like when implemented, you do see some impact of peer education, which is what you would expect based on the literature. And in most cases, I should point out, this was mostly just people kind of sending on the email we had written. So it wasn't particularly tailored. I mean, some educators did tailor it, and we did find, if I look at a regression, a significant impact based on those who did more in their building. But even, including all, regardless of what they got from the peer educator, it just seemed that when a colleague contacts you, it has a different kind of impact than when some third party that you don't know contacts you. Yeah. Okay, so conclusions. So feedback led to about a 7 to 8% reduction in energy use. This is consistent with other findings in the field, which usually is around the range of 5 to 15%. We think it's important that the low resolution feedback did have an impact. This is a pretty simple intervention to implement. It just involved kind of moving the data into a spreadsheet, developing a graph template, and sending it out. So there was very little maintenance involved, and the fact that you can do it with existing data and organizations and have that kind of impact, I think, makes it noteworthy. The peer education program, much smaller. There's problems with implementation, but my recommendation to Sustain VU was that, if you've got people stepping up to do this, it would behoove the organization to put some money behind them, give them a little resources. We think it would matter. We just don't want to coerce people into doing it, which I think most people weren't coerced into doing it, but even when people sort of, lose motivation, you want to have a team of people that can kind of step in and be there to pick up the slack. And we had some buildings that had multiple peer educators, and those seemed to work a little bit better. And then information alone had no impact, which has been seen elsewhere, and we've replicated it here. So the real point here is that we need to do a little bit more than just providing information. And the last point I'll make is that I think it's significant that we saw these effects when there was no direct financial incentive to conserve. I think there's the assumption out there that there has to be some money out there, some price or cost that's nudging people, and there is no cost involved in this case. So I think with a well-designed campaign, you can get results even when the individuals are not actually seeing the financial benefits of their behaviors. So I have this work is published. Here's the reference, and I'm happy to send a PDF to anyone who's interested. Manuel Reamer is my colleague, so I should give him credit. He's at Wilfrid Laurier right now. So that's it. Thank you.